Hello, welcome. I'm going to be talking about teaching program participants about pesticides and safe solutions to garden problems. My name is Paul Sanford, and I am a natural gardening educator for Metro Regional Government. A few of the things I'm going to be talking about today: what is Metro and why does Metro focus on pesticides? What is IPM? How could you use Grow Smart, Grow Safe for backyard habitat certification? How can you teach people about pesticide-free gardening and how can they fill out a pledge? What are some other resources that they might be able to use when you're talking with them? And finally, I'll be providing some pesticide-free gardening tips. So what is Metro? A lot of times when I'll give presentations to people and I'll say I work for Metro, even people who have lived in the region their whole life might not know what Metro is. And it's a very unique type of government. It's a regional government. It encompasses Multnomah County, Washington County, Clackamas County, and lots of different cities that are part of those counties. And one of the reasons why Metro was created is that there's a lot of things that actually cross boundaries. You have transportation that goes between counties. You have garbage service that goes between counties. And there's a lot of other things with parks and green spaces that might cross boundaries. And so Metro does a lot of the planning for the region. Part of that planning is working with communities to find out what are the needs of the community and working with the communities also to create a really vibrant and sustainable region for everyone. Besides planning, Metro also runs different facilities that are used by everyone in the region. So we have the Oregon Zoo, we have the Convention Center, the Expo Center, mini parks, and also P5, which is the different art facilities. These are different facilities that not only do you have people from all over the region, but sometimes you have people all over the world that visit. One part of Metro that I work for is the part that deals with hazardous waste. Metro collects household hazardous waste. We have two separate facilities, one in Northwest Portland and one in Oregon City. And at those facilities, you can take things like paints, you can take garden chemicals, fluorescent light bulbs, things that are flammable like gasoline, pretty much anything that's toxic that you shouldn't throw it away. And you can actually see at the bottom there's a whole list and picture of different products that you can take. Because these products are really toxic, how do you get rid of these products safely? So some of them, like propane, it's easy because they can actually get reused. Some of them can get incinerated and they just have to do it in a really safe way. With paint, we actually will reuse the paint and then it gets resold as Metro paint. But there's other products like pesticides that are very toxic. And the only way to actually deal with them is to store them in drums, and then they get taken to a separate hazardous waste landfill where they basically sit until we can figure out what to do with them. Each year, it costs us about $600,000 to deal with pesticides, and we'll get sometimes around 270,000 pounds of pesticides a year. So we have a program that I work on, the Natural Gardening Education Program, that helps teach people about how to garden without using these products so that we have a safer, healthier region. In order to figure out how we can reach people, first we need to find out what people are using and what areas of the region are pesticides being used the most. So we've done surveys and we found that about 2/3 of the region's residents actually use at least one or more garden chemical. You can see below a list of some of the different specific products. And at the bottom, you can see that in Washington and Clackamas County, people are 15 to 20% more likely to use chemical products. But we've also found that 78% of residents think that having a chemically free lawn or garden is at least somewhat important. So why is there a difference there when you have 2/3 of people who use products, but that same amount of people who think that it's better not to use products? And so education is one of the biggest things that we can do to help people find out ways that they can garden without using these products. For the most part, pesticides in a home garden are not really necessary unless you have invasive weeds that are completely taking over your property or something like termites that could damage your property. But if you have dandelions in the lawn, if you do leave them there, it's not going to damage your property. It's more kind of a nuisance. And the tricky thing with pesticides is that they can harm your plants, they can harm wildlife, and they can also harm people and waterways. If you do buy some products to use, the label on the back is so difficult to read because everything is so small, and it's a pain to even read that to figure out how to use them. So when you have conversations with people about pesticides, and we know that most people don't want to be using them, even if they are using them, how can we talk to them about pesticides without making them feel shameful or not very smart? I think that the best way is just to provide the information to people and provide it in a way that you're finding out about what they're doing. So you're asking questions about some of their pest problems, and you're providing them with a lot of resources that they can use to solve the problems that they might have. So one great resource that we have in this region is the OSU Master Gardeners. They have an email that you can ask a Master Gardener. And if you, for example, have a bug in your yard that you don't know what it is that's eating something, or your leaves are looking really weird, you can actually take a picture and you can send it to them and they'll help identify it for you. So it's a really great resource. Another thing that you can do is provide a lot of encouragement for people. You can share with them that it is difficult sometimes to deal with pests in your yard, but there are ways that you can have a pesticide-free yard that can protect people, pets, and wildlife, and have your yard really good. So one of the best tips to provide people is to train them about integrated pest management. And it's a topic that sounds very scientific, and sometimes it can be really hard for people to understand when you're sharing it with them, which why sometimes it's better to not even use the word integrated pest management, but you could share with people that there are ways that you can manage pests in your yard to prevent them from becoming problems with the least collateral damage. And by collateral damage, I mean it might be the least toxic chemical. So integrated pest management, it's a whole process and steps that you can take to make decisions about what to do next when you do have problems. And it's just a great method of different tools that you can use to achieve success. So when you're explaining integrated pest management to people, I would probably focus on the different steps that you can take, because it's a lot easier to understand when you just talk about the steps and instead of trying to explain the concept. And the first step is to focus on prevention and cultural methods. Some people say that you can use these to design problems away. For example, if you have a car and you are putting oil in it all the time, you're rotating the tires and you're taking really good care of it, that's going to be a good way to prevent future car problems. And it's the same thing with a garden with plants. If you're maintaining plants well, you're pruning them correctly, you're giving them water when they need it, you're providing them the nutrients that they need, that they're going to be a lot stronger and able to deal with pests or diseases a lot better than if they were weaker. And so just by proper maintenance, you can actually prevent a lot of problems from happening. Another thing is with the design of your yard. For example, if you have plants that are native to the area, those plants are going to be already adapted to the climate and the soils, and so they're going to survive a lot better. And so just by adding more native plants, that's going to be one way that you can prevent problems. And also making sure that the place that you plant them is the correct place. Each plant has certain requirements about how much light they need, how much water, what type of soils they need. And so making sure that when you're creating your garden, that you're putting sun-loving plants in the sun, shade-loving plants in the shade, so that, again, they're happier. Number 2 is try to identify the pests when you do see them, and identify, even like looking at the damage to the plant, what that particular pest could be. And so again, using the master gardeners if you need to, taking a picture of the pest, taking a picture of the leaf damage to figure out what exactly that pest is, because some pests, like slugs, for example, come out at night. And so if you know that they do come out at night, then you could actually go outside at night and look for them and pick them off your plants before they start chewing on them. Or if you know that there's certain plants that slugs like, you could either not plant those, or you could even put barriers around those plants. Number 3 is examine your goals and tolerance. So sometimes it might be better to not do anything at all. For example, if you have aphids on some of your roses, if you just leave them, what's going to happen? Is it going to destroy your plants, or is it just going to cause your plant to look a little wilted? Or, what type of harm is it going to cause to the plants by not doing anything? And if you just leave the aphids, are you going to be attracting birds and ladybugs and other predators that might feed on them? So if you do leave them, maybe you'll actually attract more predators to your yard that are going to really help kind of maintain that balance in your yard. Number 4, consider efficacy, cost, and risk. So sometimes, like with termites, if you do nothing at all, what is going to be the risk of that? And what is going to be the cost of that later? It might be better in the long run if you quickly deal with the problem when it's small than it would be if you just let it go on for a long time, because it could cause a lot of damage if left uncontrolled. And then also, if you do need to deal with that problem, what can you use that's going to be the safest thing? So if you have to use a pesticide, so if a least toxic one and a more toxic one both have the same results, then you would want to choose the one that's going to be least toxic. And finally, continue to monitor results in your yard. So if something's working really well, make sure you document that. If something's not working, go back through the steps again and figure out what changes can I make to my plan to get better results next time. So again, when you're teaching about integrated pest management, the first thing I would say is make sure that you share the concepts of IPM in simple language. So instead of saying IPM, you could say there's are really great steps that you can use in your yard to prevent garden problems. And you can use these steps to identify problems before they become larger problems. And then these steps will also help you reduce or eliminate the problem in the safest possible way. So approaching it from that instead of using the actual words, integrate pest management. Also, encourage people to get to really know their gardens. You can become garden detectives. You can figure out who are the usual pest suspects in my yard, when do they usually become a problem, and what can be done to prevent them from becoming a problem. So really studying your yard. And finally, use pesticides as a last resort, since it can alter the balance in your garden. If you decide to use an insecticide and it kills whatever bug it is that you need to get rid of, but it also ends up killing bees that might use your flowers or ladybugs that might feed on that particular bug, then it can actually throw your garden out of balance and make it so that you have even more problems than you had from the beginning. Because a lot of times it's actually easier for pests to rebound than it is for predators. And it can take a lot longer for you to get some of those predators back. So if you go through all the steps and you find out that you do need to use pesticides because either the pest is just going to become a much bigger problem if you don't deal with it, or you just want to fix that problem really quickly, if you do have to use them, make sure that you ask yourself, is this something that I can do safely at home by myself, or is this something that I need to have someone professionally do? Especially if you're living next to a wildlife area or stream or a river. If you apply the pesticides by yourself, there's a potential that you could cause water pollution or something else to happen. Or there's a possibility that pets in your yard or insects or things that we don't want to harm can be harmed. So first determine, is this something I can do? And then next, if it is, make sure that you follow the directions on the label and make sure that you are protecting yourself. Because even some products that you would think are less toxic, there's still potential. You might breathe in something, or you might get something on your hands that could burn your hands or something. So make sure that you're using protective gear. There's a really great resource that you'll be using when you talk to folks. It's called Grow Smart, Grow Safe. It was a website that was created a number of years back by Metro and some of our partners in Washington, like King County, Thurston County, Washington Department of Agriculture. And so basically what we did was we looked at a lot of the different products out there of pesticides, And based on different studies that were out there and anything that we could find about how hazardous it was, we gave it different classifications. So if you go to the website, this is what it will look like. You'll see that there's an area that's green, an area that's kind of orange or yellow, and then red for products. There'll be the name of the product. There'll be like the active ingredients and a number of different categories of potentially different animals or waterways or things that could be affected by it. And one of the things I want to mention about this is these chemicals that are considered green, we refer to them as low hazard, but we don't refer to them as safe. For example, there could be products that have like vinegar in it, high strength vinegar that for the most part, they're considered low hazard. When they're applied correctly, the product itself, the chemical breaks down really quickly in nature. It doesn't cause water pollution. It's not something that would really harm any creatures that like came to the spot later, but it's also very acidic. And so if you were applying it and you didn't have gloves on, you could actually get a really bad burn. It's not hazardous in the sense of like environmentally, but it is something that still isn't safe. So make sure that even if someone's using a low hazard chemical, that they wear the proper gear. How did we determine what's going to be green, what's going to be yellow or orange, and what's going to be red? First of all, we looked at what products are exempt from EPA registration. The EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. It's the federal agency that actually regulates all the different garden and agricultural products. And if the EPA decides that the ingredients in the product are really low risk, they're ones that they know don't cause any damage to the environment, and then they don't even require them to go through the EPA registration. So automatically those products we know are safe, are less hazard, and so we know that those will be green products. Another thing is we looked at the active ingredients and looked at some of the different studies on them to see how toxic or how high their environmental hazards were. And they're ones that from all the different studies that we know of, they're considered to be low toxicity. And so those are also green. Once they're considered yellow or moderate, there's been some concern from studies about how hazardous they are, and they may have ingredients that could be potential water pollution. They're not as bad as red ones, but they're ones that still have some concern. And then red chemicals are ones that we know cause a significant amount of animal toxicity. They're ones that, especially with humans, there's a high level of concern. So there's been a number of studies that shown that they could even be cancerous. And then also they're chemicals that do not break down easily in nature. So someone could apply them and they could still be around for decades. So these are ones that are considered high hazard. Again, this is just talking about some of the categories, and you can see that these are some of the potential risk with some of these chemicals. And if you look at the right, kind of in the rating symbols, there's like a green, there's a yellow, and a red. So for each product, not only is the overall product given a color, but these specific subcategories are also given a hazard rating too. For Grow Smart, Grow Safe, the way that it's used with the Backyard Habitat certification program is that when people want to go through the certification, there's going to be different levels of certification. So there's the silver, there's gold, there's platinum. And with silver, people could use products that are yellow or moderate if they need to. Again, if it's important that they're following their IPM strategy and they're trying to use these products as kind of a last resort, only if needed. But it is something where, you know, if someone needs to, that they can use the yellow or the orange, and they can also use the green. With the gold certification, it's preferred that they don't use red or yellow. There's always going to be situations where even if they're following their IPM strategy, you know, something comes up where for the safety of their house or something else that it's determined that they might need to use this. These aren't chemicals that they're going to be using, you know, all the time. So trying to eliminate red and yellow as much as possible for gold. And then for platinum, again, trying to eliminate red or yellow zone chemicals, following an IPM strategy, and then also taking the pledge to be pesticide free. With all of these chemicals that are found in Grow Smart, Grow Safe, there are ones sometimes that there might be controversy about why a particular chemical was given a certain rating. And probably the most controversial of all of them is glyphosate. It's a chemical that's used a lot. It's found in Roundup and a lot of other different brands. In Grow Smart, Grow Safe, it was at one time in the green zone, and other research came in, it was changed to the red zone. And the reason why it was changed is because one of the international organizations that had gone through quite a few different studies found that there could be a possible link to cancers in human with this particular chemical. And the thing is, there's so many different studies that have been done with glyphosate, and some studies will not find any harm that could possibly have resulted from using Roundup. And there's others that, maybe there's a potential link. And because of that, even in really large agencies that part of their job to assess this, that there is disagreement. And so the Environmental Protection Agency and the European Union, they haven't found that there is a potential for it to be carcinogenic. So they do disagree with IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And for Grow Smart, Grow Safe, the reason why, even though there was a disagreement that it was chosen as red, is that for home use, sometimes it's best to just play it on the safe side. It's still a really important tool. Roundup's used a lot for different organizations that have to manage large amounts of property. For example, some of the local governments that manage really large properties, they may have English ivy or blackberry or some weeds that are really taking over that natural area. And really their best and safest tool that they can use is actually Roundup. For the most part, in a home garden, which is what Grow Smart, Grow Safe is focused on, it's not as necessary. And so it's just taking that caution with it. There is a chemical in Grow Smart, Grow Safe that's similar to glyphosate called tricloper, and that one is in the yellow zone. But again, if there's ways that you can emphasize to people that they can pull up the weeds or other maintenance practices to get rid of the weeds first, that's kind of preferred. These are some of the general categories of pesticides. Pesticides can kill rodents, and those are called rodenticides. And then you have insecticides that kill insects, and fungicides that kill fungus, and herbicides that kill plants. And they're all grouped under the label as a pesticide. But this is kind of a list of some of the specific chemicals for each category that are kind of the worst. And so you can see some of them. One of the nice things about Grow Smart, Grow Safe is that not only does it have the brand name and the particular name found on the label, but it has the active ingredient. And so if you're really interested in learning and digging deeper into like how safe that chemical is, you can click on that and it'll take you to Thurston County's website that then goes into more detail about each chemical. In Grow Smart, Grow Safe, it doesn't really go into that detail. It talks about pets and wildlife, but at Thurston County, it does go into a lot more specifics about what particular wildlife might be affected by the chemical. And if you want to find out even more, then they also have PDFs that go into a lot greater detail about that specific product. One of the big topics recently has been about pollinators, because there's been a lot of bees that have been dying off, and there's definitely concern about the loss of pollinators. And so one of the great resources, if you're really interested about pollinators, is the Xerces Society. It's an international organization that focuses on pollinators, but the really cool thing is that they're actually located in Portland, and they have so many great resources and fact sheets about some of the challenges that pollinators are facing and what are the ways that we can protect them. One of the pesticides that is the biggest problem with pollinators are neonicotinoids, and it's a class of insecticides. They're actually the most widely used insecticide throughout the world. And the reason that they're used a lot is that for mammals, they tend to be considered fairly safe. If people are using it, there's less of a worry that you're going to harm people, but they're also very good at killing insects. And so the problem is they're not very selective of what specific insect they kill. They can also last for a long time after they're sprayed. There's some neonicotinoids that even after you've used them, they're still present in pretty good quantities, even after like 10 years. So they last for a long time. They are absorbed into plants really easily. So for example, if they were sprayed on near the roots or near the leaves, they would actually be absorbed through the plants and could travel all the way to the nectar and the pollen. So when bees are collecting them, they are accidentally poisoned by the chemical. And in some cases, even a small dose can have a really large effect. And sometimes they are just used extensively without even really the need to. So if a farmer has a crop and they're wanting to prevent one specific thing from harming that plant, instead of going after that one branch or leaf that might have the problem, they might spray their whole orchard with it. So it's not just spot dealing with the problem, it's doing this massive spraying of everything to deal with it. Besides bees, they can also harm some of our beneficial predators like parasitoid wasps. They can contaminate nectar and reduce the survivorship of ladybugs and lacewings. They've impacted the mortality of the minute pirate bug, which is another beneficial insect. And the residues in the soil can also harm ground beetles and rogue beetles. A lot of times they're also used on ornamental plants and lawns. And they found that the level of application is much greater than on crops. Typically in your own yard, if you're going to use a specific thing and you're not following the label, you might way overdo it. And so they found that sometimes it can be up to 120 times overused in home gardens than in agricultural fields. When you go through the whole process with people about here are different ways that pesticides can be problems, here's different steps that you can take to reduce the amount of pesticides that you use so that you can protect wildlife and people, pets. So what's the next step that you can talk about with people? And one of the things is to ask people if they want to pledge to be pesticide free. One of the things that we found is that when someone actually has a sign up in your yard that says pesticide free zone, that they are less likely to actually spray. It's kind of a reminder to them that I want to protect ladybugs and I want to encourage beneficial insects into my yard. And so I'm going to think about all those integrated pest management steps to prevent and to find safe ways to deal with the pests without using pesticides. And if people want a sign for their yard, all they have to do is fill out the pledge. If you actually have the signs with you, you could give them a sign with the pledge card, or they can mail it in for free and we'll send them out a sign. So the last part of the presentation, I just want to talk about some tips that you can share with people about ways that they can create a really healthy garden and a really vibrant garden that's going to have lots of beneficial insects and wildlife that's going to be able to weather the storm and to deal with problems when problems do occur. The first thing is to build better soil. Next is plant right for your site, water wisely, and then finally use tools, not toxics. One of the really cool things about soil is that there's actually more living creatures under your feet than above ground. There's billions and billions of beneficial bacteria in just a handful of soil. And you also have worms, there's different beetles that are really beneficial and millipedes, and there's really cool ecosystem that's found in the soil. And all of these creatures, they help break down plants and dead animals and things like that and turn them back into really great nutrients for your soil. And so really the key to have a healthy garden is to have healthy soil. And you can do that by either encouraging different beneficial soil creatures to visit, and usually that's by just having food for them, leaving the leaves on the ground. When you mow the lawn, use a mulching mower so that you are leaving the grass clippings. And all of these great beneficial creatures are then going to break down those nutrients and provide them to the plant so that they're able to use. If you do have to fertilize, make sure that you're sticking with a slow release fertilizer. And typically natural fertilizers are going to be considered slow release, and that could be like blood meal or bone meal, cottonseed meal. I mean, there's so many different natural fertilizers, kelp meal, and all of them, because they're kind of natural, they're not synthesized, they actually tend to break down slow over time. And so they're slowly releasing the nutrients to your plants and providing them over a longer period of time. Synthetic fertilizers, which are some of the ones that you can buy at the store, they're created in a way so that they release the nutrients very quickly. And a lot of times plants aren't able to actually absorb them quick enough, and they can tend to filter through the water table and end up in our streams. So we want to avoid those because they can be major pollutants. I had mentioned this earlier about prevention, that the best way is having a really good design to your garden by choosing plants that are going to best match the soil, sun, and moisture of your site. Also, group plants have similar needs, especially if you have a supplemental watering system. If you're putting plants together that's like the same amount of water, then you're not going to be overwatering some or underwatering some. Also, making sure that you're adding a lot of native plants and habitat features like rocks and logs and other things that are going to be home for a lot of the beneficial creatures in your yard. Finally, growing food. That's another great thing that you can do. Water wisely, making sure that you have plants in the right soil, making sure that you're putting in plants that are adapted to the climate, again, using native plants, choosing plants that are drought tolerant. All those are going to make it a lot easier to garden because you're not constantly having to water them, and it's going to save you money too. And a lot of times using tools is going to be a lot easier than using toxics to get rid of a problem. So for example, if you had weeds in your yard and you sprayed them, they're not going to just disappear. There'll still be a weed there that might look really bad and burnt, but you're still going to have to dig it up. So a lot of times it's quicker just to dig the weed up instead of spraying it first. And also, the more proper maintenance you do with plants, the healthier it's going to be. With lawns, if you do pull weeds in your lawn, make sure that you're not just leaving that bare spot, but that you put some grass seeds in it and a little mulch over top to kind of fill that spot in. Because if you don't fill it in with grass, it's probably just going to be a spot where weed seeds are going to resprout again. Making sure that instead of poisoning the insects, that you're letting birds and other predators eat those insects. And you want to make sure that you're not unintentionally harming birds and ladybugs by spraying their food source. Let bugs eat your slugs. There's a lot of beetles that love to eat slugs. And also snakes, like garter snakes, that like to eat slugs too. So finally, here's a bunch of resources that you can share with people. One of them, of course, I mentioned before is Grow Smart, Grow Safe. We have a lot of publications at Metro that provide a lot of great information. Metro's website is another great resource. The Master Gardener OSU Extension, another great resource. University of California, they have a really great resource on integrated pest management. I also mentioned earlier about the Xerxes Society. A new resource that's coming later this year is called Solve Pest Problems. And it's going to focus on the major pests, like either weeds or things like rodents or insects that are pests. And then it'll walk you through different processes that you can use at home, like the different steps with integrated pest management to deal with the pests without having to use pesticides. And also, if you're really into native plants, Oregon Flora Project, they have a really great website. And you can actually see what plants are native to your specific area. So not just the state, but also like the city you live in. And we also have demonstration gardens that you can visit that will have a lot of information about attracting wildlife to your garden. So one of them is the wildlife garden at the Oregon Zoo. And you can see some of the different things we have there. We also have master gardeners out there supporting the program and answering questions. And we also have another garden out at Blue Lake Park in Fairview. I just want to thank all of you for your commitment to community education and promoting habitat gardening and helping residents reduce pesticide use. If you have any more questions, you can contact me, Paul Sanford, at paul.sanford@oregonmetro.gov, and I can answer your questions. Thank you.